Wednesday War Caller, Jess Romero, Kyle Clement, talking about what is an exorcist, what is a demonologist. We're going to get into all kinds of different conversations here. Also, what is the USCCB modality of exorcism? But Kyle, the point that I'm making is that when people ask me about different priests, I'm always getting asked, Jess, what do you know about Father Reitner? Jess, what do you know about Father Carapi? Jess, what do you know about Father Joseph Mary, etc.? And I'm honest with people. As Catholics, we're called to speak the truth. And so I had asked you a couple of years ago, because I know you have access to all the exorcists basically that are practicing around the world because the fact that Father Ripperger carries so much weight and you're his case manager and you guys do a lot of consultation across dioceses and across the world. And you guys are always transferring cases as well when the energumens move. And I had asked you years ago, I said, hey, Kyle, is Father Carlos Martin, is he on your database? Is he an exorcist? And you told me, you said, no, Jesse, he's not an exorcist. And I said, nah, I think maybe Kyle just missed that one, because he's all over the internet where he says he's an exorcist. I mean, he was interviewed by Lila Rose and Matt Fred and Joel McClay, everybody, he's an exorcist. So I kind of said, I think Kyle may be wrong on this one. I think maybe he overlooked it on his database. So I sent an email to Companions of the Cross. They responded to me. Here's what it says. Dear Jesse, in answer to your inquiry, Father Carlos Martin has not been appointed as an exorcist by a particular diocese. His full-time ministry is Bishop of the Church. Close quote. And so, Kyle, you were right. I was thinking, I think Kyle missed it on this one. You had told me, he goes, Jesse's not. And now all I'm doing here is I am perplexed as a layperson, because Kyle, all of us are bound by the 8th commandment, bearing false witness. And to me, this is just fraternal correction. I think all of us have to live in reality. We can't, Tim Waltz knows about living in reality. He took some flack for it, saying he went overseas with a rifle when he didn't. And you have the admiral that works for Biden right now, who's a man that thinks he's a woman. What all of us have to live in reality. And so to me, I scratch my head and I'm asking myself, why is Father Martin saying that he's an exorcist? He's got a whole video thing called the Exorcism Files, where he shows about the phenomenon of the demon. He just came out with a book. Kyle, he's not even a mandated exorcist. It would be like if I wrote a book on, I don't know, mixed martial arts, being a mixed martial arts fighter, or how to use, a particular type of rifle, and I know nothing about it. I just don't understand why he's purporting to be an exorcist when his order says he's not. And you told me the same thing. I'm just scratching my head, and I can't understand why he would do something like that.
I can offer you no insight as to the man's motivation. Just very simply, again, we interact with a lot of priests. The exorcists are of one of two types. There's those that remain hidden at the request of their bishop. So there's a lot of exorcists operating out there whom you would not know.
Right.
And they're certainly not saying that they are exorcists.
Correct.
And there's about 35 of those guys, and we interact with them, exorcists around the world, on a fairly regular basis with regard to consultation and picking up cases and transferring cases, etc. So, and again, it's a small roster of people, and we don't make a differentiation. There are many of these exorcists that follow models that we don't follow, but all of them have been educated either through an apprentice methodology or through an institute such as Leo the 13th. Father Ripperger and I have trained 40 plus exorcists ourselves in Father Ripperger's criteria. And interestingly enough, about 25 of those 40 had gone through the Leo and found that they needed some more practicum. They needed more nuts and bolts, if you will, of what to do. And so I'm familiar, very familiar with the Leo and its list of alumni, and this individual does not appear on any of those lists of alumni as having received formal training, nor does he appear on any of our list of exorcists. And again, that term has a canonical definition. Now, we also have a list of priests that we refer to as general practitioners, who many of them are doing minor exorcisms and are actively engaged in deliverance. And that list runs to the hundreds.
Yeah.
But these men would not classify themselves nor describe themselves as exorcists.
Correct. Hey, I know a lot of them in Los Angeles. They'll say, "No, Jesse, don't call me an exorcist. I don't do exorcisms. I do minor deliverances." They'll correct you. And I also did call the Pope Leo, by the way, and I inquired as to just to make sure, to give him the benefit of the doubt. I figured he probably got trained there, and they told me that Father Carlos Smart has never been a student there. I spoke with one of the professors. Now, the only reason I'm worried about this, Kyle, because again, it's not good for any one of us to self-identify as something that we're not. There's just a lack of honesty and integrity. And I'm looking here at the USCCB's website on how a priest becomes an exorcist. It says, USCCB website, a priest may be appointed to the office of exorcist either on a stable basis or for a particular occasion ad octum by the diocesan bishop. In either case, the exorcist should work closely with and under the direction of the bishop. Then it talks about the criteria. The exorcist should possess piety, knowledge, prudence, and integrity of life. That means honesty. That means truthfulness. So, Kyle, let me ask you another question. The word demonologist, this is another word that some people are using these days. Ed and Lorraine Warren, rest in peace. They were Catholic charismatics that were running around the East Coast doing, they would actually say exorcisms. And they would actually use that term. But I'll say deliverances. And they would call themselves demonologists. They'd identify themselves as demonologists. There's other people in the country right now that identify themselves as demonologists. Now, my only problem with that, and correct me if I'm wrong, since you're the expert in this field, first of all, the word demonologist is not a New Testament word or an Old Testament word. It's not found in sacred scripture. Also, it's not an ecclesial term. You don't find that in pre-Vatican II, post-Vatican II. It's not an official title of a Catholic. And so and I know lay Catholics, there's a guy again from the East Coast who runs around, calls himself a Catholic demonologist. He says he does exorcisms of infested houses. Another guy named Kenneth Deal, he just passed away a couple of years ago, rest in peace. He also, him and his wife had a podcast for years, and the Deals, I think it was called The Real Deal or something like that. And he also called himself a Catholic demonologist. So my question is, Kyle, is there such a thing as a Catholic demonologist? And should a Catholic use that term for himself, yes or no?
Well, it's two very interesting questions. And so I'll throw, again, words have meaning and there are terms. And so if you just, do the old Jethro Bodine and cipher the word, it's made of demonologist. And so this is one with a knowledge of demons. So then de facto, every person possessed is a demonologist. They have knowledge of demons. The point that I want to make, though, is you're right. This is a term that is not, it's not a term that is used by the approved authors. It's not used by the church fathers. And it is a creation, if you will, of a designation whereby the person seeks to make themselves of value because they have knowledge that you need. And who does that sound like? What does that sound like? It sounds like the diabolical is this need for hidden knowledge. It's Gnosticism, or a form of Gnosticism. It also puts the focus on the phenomenology, on the demon, not on the human, not on Christ, but rather on the demon. And the term demonologist comes straight out of the paranormal craze. And several of these practitioners were paranormal investigators. They investigated, quote, hauntings and all of these things. And so 2 or 3 of these individuals, this is their background. These are their credentials as they start out as paranormal investigators. Then they endear themselves to a bishop or to an exorcist, much like a sensitive who says, I have information that you need. You will not be able to do your cases without this requisite information. It's a very nefarious designation and title. The other term that I want to use, and it's often used with this term, is the term pariti. Now, a pariti means an expert, and it's a designation by the church. But I will tell you that this term itself is tainted because this term came to popular usage in the Second Vatican Council when people of very dubious qualifications were listed as pariti. For instance, priests with mistresses, theologians who are homosexual were suddenly designated as pariti so that we no longer questioned what they were saying. And you'll see these terms used not synonymously, but together as, again, the bishop, person endears themselves as a sensitive or having Gnostic knowledge, hidden knowledge, occult knowledge, through their knowledge of demonology, etc. And they endear themselves to exorcists, bishops who commission exorcists, etc. And this is a phenomenon that's going on. The thing is right now, spiritual warfare, the diabolical realm, the spiritual realm, this is very, very popular and generates a lot of, and Dan taught me this term. Dr. Dan taught me this term, and I really like this term. These generate a lot of what's called clickbait. And so they generate a lot of traffic. They generate a lot of revenue. And so these are the things that sell: books on the subject, posts on the subject, videos, etc. And that's being leveraged in many ways by these individuals. And so I think that we do well to look at that aspect. I hope that addressed your question with regard to demonology.
Yes, it does. How can people access some of your lectures, and what are you busy doing these days?
Oh, thanks, Jess. So go to www.monte, M-O-N-T-E, Cristo, CHRISTO.net. And we are 4 days into a pre-Advent retreat for Reclamation Theology. Not too late to join. You can get the recordings. But go to that website and explore all of those things. Register. It costs nothing. Register and you'll have access to a lot of Father Ripperger talks that are nowhere else. Dan, myself, Jesse, a lot of resources that are there to help you in your Catholic faith and your understanding, traditional and right understanding of spiritual warfare and the various things Catholic as well as our traditional faith. I encourage you to subscribe to Reclamation Theology. There's a podcast, about a 10-minute session each morning that'll give you a reflection point. We talk about the old calendar, what's happening in the liturgical cycle. The diabolical are very much aware of the liturgical cycle, and most of the satanic rites and rituals are done in opposition to holy days. And so once you can see and have some insight into that, it helps you with your understanding. Then there are the trainings, the various trainings that are available. Exorcist training, you can sponsor a priest. Like we said earlier in the show, Father and I have trained some 40 plus exorcists, and we'll train some each year. And that's a hands-on practicum. They come out of that week-long course fully functional as an exorcist. They know what they need to know. Now, most of those attendees are there at the direct commission, again, of their bishop, preparing to receive a mandate or the designation of a stable office of an exorcist within their diocese. We also travel from diocese to diocese doing, setting up teams and teaching priests. Was up in New York last month teaching and explaining our methodology, our model to a group of priests up there. So a lot of just education, a lot of formation, a lot of resources available at montecristo.net and those trainings. Also, I would encourage you to use this archive on VMPR. There are a lot of really, really good shows. Jesse and Terry do a great job. There is a treasure of shows with Bishop Strickland. Father Ripperger is going to be on in another hour today with Terry and Jesse. Virgin Most Powerful is just a tremendous resource, a lot of archive things. So there's a lot of things at your fingertips to listen to what is right, what is in conformity with Catholic tradition and Catholic norms. There's just a lot of good information available.
Thanks a lot, Kyle. Last thing I want to mention about the demonologist using that title is that I think, first of all, you're putting the emphasis on the demon by calling yourself a demonologist. You're not putting the emphasis on Christ or maybe an angel or a saint. The emphasis is on the demon. So to me, that's a disordered title. To me, that's like throwing chum in shark-infested waters where you're swimming. Authentic Catholic spiritual warfare is, number one, Christ-centered. Number two, the healing of the person who's afflicted. And number three, lastly, on liberation from the demon. He's tertiary, okay? So to call yourself a demonologist is not a New Testament term. It's not an ecclesiastical church term. And it's not good to accentuate the demon as a title used to introduce yourself as a Catholic involved in some type of ministry or apostolic work. That's why St. Thomas Aquinas, who knew more about demons than anybody else by far, he called himself the angelic doctor, not the demonic doctor. And so I just want to mention that this term has never been used in 2,000 years of Catholic tradition to identify a layperson who assists in an exorcism team. Also, Kyle, there's an article, and I know this is going to resonate with you. It's from the Catholic Herald. It came out today. Just want to read one paragraph. It says, in some circles, Catholics and otherwise, exorcists are the new celebrities. You may have heard of Father Gabriel Amorth, often known as the exorcist of the Vatican, who famously claimed there were more demons per square meter resident there than anywhere else on earth. Or you may be one of the millions or so following the astonishing Father Chad Ripperger on YouTube, who informs his followers on a variety of aspects about the spiritual life, lately including the question of whether or not demons have a particular antipathy to Gregorian chant. If so, you may also have become aware of Father Carlos Martin, who has published a book that the Catholic Herald is about to review, The Exorcist Files. Now, here's my problem with the article, and most people don't know this, is that Father Amorth and Father Ripperger, they're in a league all by themselves. They are respected exorcists that have a mandate, that have been trained and that have been to the proper schooling. But this article, again, because they don't know what they don't know. Catholic Herald, they included Father Carlos Martin, in the same sentence with them. He's not a mandated exorcist. So the comparison here is apples and oranges. You have two giants, Father Amorth and Father Ripperger, in the same sentence with Father Martin, who probably does deliverance sessions at best if he has time, because he's always traveling from one parish to another doing relic displays. So I don't know how much time he has to interview and maybe, sit down and get to know the person and do a diagnostic and start doing sessions of deliverance. But Kyle, again, see, this is where the Catholic world is being hoodwinked. They're putting Father Carlos Martin in the same stature as Father Ripperger and Father Amorth, and he's not. Comments?
Well, he's certainly not with regard to the formal designation as an exorcist. So when he writes or when he tells a story of experiences when he was an exorcist, that title simply is not, he doesn't have that credential canonically. And so he's using the term in a non-canonical way, perhaps. He may have sat in and observed some cases. There was a time when I've known him for more than 15 years, and there was a time when we did discuss various cases when he was in Canada, and the whole point being is that from what I know of him, this credential is not a bona fide credential that he claims. That's simply all I can say with regard to
Right.
that. But the real issue is twofold. Number one is when he and a person like this is lumped together with a Father Amorth, a Father Ripperger, a Monsignor Esseff, then what happens is there's a diminution of the entire office. There is a diminution in the dignity of the office of exorcist and what it is to be an exorcist. In the same way that the people who identify as women who are men, this is a mockery of women. This is ultimately a crime against femininity. And that's what we see here. I think that's one aspect. Here is probably the more serious aspect, and this is where my ox is gored, so to speak. This is where his actions affect me. Is my job is administering cases of pretty severe cases of obsession and possession, dealing with and talking with penitents and energumen and people who are trying to work their way through deliverance, who are trying to work their way through a methodology under the direction of a priest and who are suffering horribly. And when this man says things that are inconsistent with known theological concepts, with set procedures of exorcism and deliverance, with elements of the protocol which these people are being asked to obey, which are difficult. When he is speaking directly against those things, and he wears a Roman collar and purports to be an exorcist, then these are causing great scandal in the church. They're causing great disruption in these people's lives who are trying to go through the suffering requisite with liberation. And when someone who purports to be an exorcist says something that is inconsistent with what their exorcist, but what their practitioner is saying, then it's very, very difficult to minister to them, to counsel them, to encourage them to stay the course, listen to their exorcist. And it's a discordant voice in the discourse. When you listen to the other exorcist, there's a continuity. There's an understanding that there is a crucible to go through. There's something that has to be done. And it's not about just finding the antithesis saint or finding the magic thing or consulting a seer or finding which relic speaks to you or these kinds of things. That's not, it is a grinding it out. It is a return to a vibrant practice of your faith. It is being Catholic and undergoing a certain amount of suffering. When they are hearing things that are inconsistent with those known universal truths from a purported reliable source, that causes me and other case facilitators and exorcist priests a great bit of difficulty.
Carl, I've heard him say in several podcasts because, again, he's making the rounds on a lot of podcasters, Lila Rose, Matt Fradd, many others, Reason and Theology. He said that he studied all the systems out there. And again, you have the Roman model, the charismatic model, the USCCB model, the Liber Christo model. So he studied them all out there. And he, I guess he found them wanting. So he came up with his own model. Now, here's what my jaw just drops. How can a person who's not a mandated exorcist determine that the four models of exorcism used in the United States in the Catholic Church are insufficient, and he's going to come up with his own model? To me, that's hubris that I can't even wrap my mind around. We'll be right back. Jess Romero, Carl Clement, talking spiritual warfare. We'll be right back.